Making slow, gradual changes to your diet, rather than a dramatic transformation, is often the best way to take on a new lifestyle. And it allows us to start to almost dip our toes in the water and get a feeling for what this new way of eating and new way of living is going to be about, without having to transform our lives overnight and really go through a process that can often be difficult. So I find when I work with patients in my office that about half of them are really eager to get started and be very aggressive and make dramatic changes, and the other half aren't quite there yet, and that's fine. Over time, I've noticed that there really isn't much difference between one group or the other, that they both tend to do very well over time. And it is a personal decision about what changes you're willing to make. And I often find that people who are starting to think about this and recognize something has to be done in their life so that they can become healthier and lose some weight and just feel better on a daily basis, can sometimes get started into this. And once they do it and they start to say, hey, this isn't so bad, they can move along through the process at their own pace, and it works out very well. So I found that sometimes slow, gradual changes are the most effective. It's how I changed my diet 7 or 8 years ago, and how I've worked with really hundreds and hundreds of patients at this point who've been able to do it and incorporate one change every month or so over time, and gradually kind of get to the same place that those patients are when they make a dramatic or significant change in their diet. So when we're doing this, we're going to start with our regular diet. So I think that's one of the most important things when I work with patients in the office, is that, all right, nothing really has to change. If you have this for breakfast every morning, you can continue to have this for breakfast at first. And then over time, we're going to have to reevaluate each meal, each snack, each habit that you have in terms of your eating, and attempt to change that over time. So what we'll do is every month there's one change. And what I have patients do is really focus on that change for a month. And a month is a general term that I use in the office just because it works, but you can really choose any interval of time. And during that month, you're going to explore new recipes and try new things. And I have patients make a commitment. I'm going to try these 2 or 3 new things, or more if you're into it, but at least a few things that are different than the way you normally eat. And you can't be afraid. If you're going to change the way you feel and you're going to change your weight, you are going to have to change. And change requires trying new things. The older we get, the harder it is to try new things. But it is still possible. And I've seen 75-year-old patients make dramatic changes in the way they eat and get dramatic results. So don't be afraid to try new things. And every month we build on the month before. So in the first month, which is a pound of vegetables, that when we get into month 2 and make that change, we still have to honor the first month of a pound of vegetables. And so we slowly build our diet up to the point where we're ultimately following the full pound of cure plan after 5, 6 months, or whatever interval you choose. And ultimately we get there. But this whole building process really works well for a lot of people and is something that I do on a regular basis with patients. Again, move at your own pace. If you kind of get through the first month and after 2 weeks say, hey, I really get this, and you kind of look ahead and see what's going on in month 2 and say, I think I could do this now. Don't let this defined time interval of a month slow you down. Move forward, and you should really feel comfortable kind of moving along at your own pace rather than trying to just hold up and wait for a defined interval of time. So if a month is not enough and you want to drag this out to 6 weeks, 2 months, or even longer, go for it. I've had patients come back and tell me after 2 or 3 years that it took them almost that period of time to make these final changes and to get on the plan completely. And it really just is a process of, life is going on around us, and we can't always stop to change our diet. And so you just have to find these little moments of calm and use those to kind of advance your diet, and then wait until the next moment of calm comes and you've kind of gathered your feet underneath you and are prepared to make the next change. This idea right here is the most important component of this whole process and of the whole pound of cure plan. When we implement this diet, it's so important that we focus as much, if not more, on the foods that we're adding in rather than on the foods that we're eliminating. And this is a really difficult thing for patients who've been used to dieting and look at dieting as self-sacrifice and requiring willpower. That they tend to overly focus on the things that they can't eat and discount the value of the foods that they can eat. And because we now understand this idea of your metabolic thermostat and how starvation efforts are not going to work, and what's required is a change in the way you eat to drive permanent and durable weight loss, that we have to recognize that the new foods that we're adding in are so important and have to be embraced and by trying new recipes and shopping for them, more so than focusing on the things that you can no longer have. And if you really embrace these new foods, and each month is really set up this way, what you'll find is that the foods that we're trying to eliminate, it's not so hard to get rid of them. So make sure that you focus on that. And we have recipes and meal plans that are going to help you implement this. So I'm just going to go over quickly all of the 6 months, if you will, and I use month again as an arbitrary time interval, and to serve as an introduction. And then for each month, we're going to have a fairly lengthy video because there is a lot to cover with each month that will describe how to do this in detail and exactly why each change is so important. So month 1 is the most fundamental change that people can make to their diet, and it's the one that I find most people do okay with, but every now and then I'll find a real vegetable hater. And when I find that vegetable hater, I always say, you know, and usually it's a guy, not to be prejudiced, but it usually is a guy who hates the vegetables. When I'll say, well, is it every vegetable that you hate? And without fail, there's always a few out there that they're willing to eat. And so we start with those vegetables. And what you find is as you start to implement those few vegetables into your diet and eat more of them, then the other ones don't seem as bad. And we kind of, you know, the carrots and celery and broccoli and cauliflower, which are the general staples, are where we often start. And then we kind of get ourselves into things like asparagus and green leafy vegetables and other things that may not have as much of a taste for. But as you get into this and as your diet starts to improve, you find that you start to enjoy vegetables more. So even the vegetable haters out there can get through this. And again, if you're someone who falls into that category, you may need 2 months for this stage. And that's fine. Take your time. Do this at whatever pace feels right for you. So in this stage, the emphasis of the meal should be vegetables. And we want to look at every meal, even breakfast, and ask ourselves, how can I add vegetables into this meal? And we want to eat as many as we can. A pound always seems like a lot. When I say, hey, you got to eat a pound of vegetables, everyone's like, woo, that's a lot of vegetables. And invariably, they'll come back at the end of the month and say, you know, a pound is really not that much. And they're right, it really isn't. With a concerted effort, just kind of adding a few bites of vegetables here and there into every meal, you'll find that you can get to that pound pretty readily and quickly. But a pound is the minimum, and quite honestly, we don't really see a lot of weight loss from just a pound of vegetables. It's only when we get up to 1.5 pounds to really 2 pounds of vegetables a day that the weight starts to come off quickly. And another thing that I think is really great is vegetables are probably your best weapon against weight gain. So sometimes I'll see patients who say, you know, I'm really gaining a lot of weight, and we kind of see what we can figure out. And as we talked about in some of the past videos, sometimes it's medication, sometimes it's menopause, sometimes it's an injury or a period of inactivity. Whatever the cause, we find if we get the vegetables in and start really adding a lot of vegetables to the diet, the weight gain really stops. And if you're really struggling with weight gain, adding more vegetables, getting up to that 1.5 pounds, 2 pound magic number will bring your weight gain to a real standstill, and is a great way to stop that. So now month 2 is the first month where we have to eliminate something. We're going to get rid of sugar and artificial sweeteners, and instead we're going to start eating lots of fruit. So refined sugar and artificial sweeteners are addictive. And so many patients will find that the first week can be difficult as you get over this addiction. And this may, in many situations, this is really the first challenge that patients are faced with in this program. And when they have to face their sweet cravings and their sweet tooth and their sweet addictions head on. And to be honest with you, artificial sweeteners are just as hard to stop as refined sugar, and really just as important, as we'll talk about in subsequent videos. So addressing this and getting rid of these foods, but instead starting to embrace fruit. And what happens is after a few days off of refined sugar and artificial sweeteners, you'll notice the fruit starts tasting sweeter and you get more satisfaction from it. And after a few weeks, you'll find that fruit really does a great job in satisfying your sweet cravings, and it allows you to eliminate refined sugar without as much difficulty over the long run as you thought. But that first week can be tricky. Most of us think about whole fruit, and that is certainly the most common way that I consume it and that most people do. But I also want you to think about smoothies, and especially green smoothies with a green leafy vegetable like baby spinach or kale. What we call nice cream, which is generally made from bananas and other frozen fruit. And then yogurt fruit meals, whether in a blender or just plain yogurt with some fruit in it. These things are delicious, and it's a great way for you to increase your fruit and kind of replace especially that ice cream craving that a lot of people have. But really any sweet craving will be addressed by this. In month 3, we're going to work to eliminate junk food and instead replace it with lots of nuts. So junk food, just like sugar and artificial sweeteners, is completely addictive. And getting rid of junk food can stop this rapid cycling of your blood sugar. And what we find is that hunger and cravings are rarely true hunger. Your body doesn't need additional nutrition. Instead, what's happening is either by being sabotaged by the artificial flavors that are in junk food, or by the rapid blood sugar spikes caused by insulin release and then blood sugar dips, causing low blood sugar, which triggers us to eat again. This whole roller coaster blood sugar ride that we go on after eating junk food drives us to eat, and it's not real hunger. So we overeat and we sabotage the effects of our metabolic thermostat, which is working to keep our fat stores stable and to keep us from gaining weight. And we're going to replace junk food with nuts. And I love nuts for so many reasons. Number one, they're convenient. You can stick them in your car. You can stick them at work. You don't have to refrigerate them. They stay around for a long time, and they're always there for you. They're also reasonably affordable. Now, nuts are not the cheapest things on the planet, but in general, you can buy fairly large portions of nuts that are going to last you a long time for a reasonable price. They're also very satisfying. You feel very full. And they're everywhere. You can get them at gas stations. You can pull into a grocery store and get them. You can buy them in bulk at stores like Costco and Sam's Club and have them ready for you at home and in the office. So you're never going to be caught without access to food that can kind of keep you, fill you back up and prevent you from getting into the drive-through line or stopping for a candy bar or something along those lines. But when we choose nuts, we're really going to focus on the raw or natural preparations as well as dry roasted. It's not so much the salt that's the problem, it's the oil. And we'll go into that in much more detail in one of the later videos. Month 4 is about carbs, and we tend to talk very vaguely about carbs, but most of us actually kind of think of them in a more narrow term. When we say carbs, we don't think about beans, we don't think about nuts, and sometimes we don't even think about fruit, which all have a significant amount of carbohydrate in them. We tend to think about grains and processed grains. And so month 4 is going to focus on these foods, and we're going to try to eliminate the processed carbohydrates, the breads, the rices, the instant oatmeals, and instead we're going to replace them with colorful starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes and squash and beets and even turnips. And we're even going to be careful with whole grains. And this is really a gray area for most patients and something that we'll kind of work on to help you define and establish where in that whole grain space, things like brown rice and oatmeal and even whole grain breads, is there going to be some leeway for you to continue to lose weight but still be able to maintain a reasonable lifestyle. We're also going to explore some pasta alternatives. There's a lot of gluten-free pasta that's typically made from some type of rice flour that's heavily processed. But there's also a growing number of pasta replacements that are made from beans, and these things are fantastic. There's even some made here in Detroit that I'm a big fan of. And we're going to look at those and see if we can implement those into your diet instead. Talking about beans, that really leads us to month 5, which is about eating less meat and more beans. And instead of thinking about veganism, and again, the Pound a Cure is not a vegan diet. It's a diet where you eat less meat. We're not going to think about veganism as this kind of you're either are or are not a vegan. Instead, we're going to think about it as a spectrum. And we're going to, when I talk to patients and I say, have you ever thought about veganism? And they look at me and they almost take a step toward the door like they're out of here. I can tell that they're not interested in being a vegan, and I'm not a vegan, and I don't know if I'm ready to be one. But eating less meat is something that when I ask patients about it, could you do that? Absolutely, yeah, I could eat less meat. That's not a problem. I just can't give it up altogether. And that's really what we're going to do in this 5th step here. And instead of the meat, we're going to start adding a lot of beans. And I think beans are one of the most critical components of the Pound a Cure plan. They stabilize your blood sugar. They're incredibly filling. And generally, when you eat beans, you stay full for a long period of time. This is really different than vegetables or fruit, which can fill you up, but really over a short interval of time. But beans, because of the way they release glucose, because of the way they travel through our GI tract, and because of the incredible amount of fiber that they contain, they keep you full for a very long period of time. They're incredibly inexpensive. Dry beans are probably one of the cheapest foods you can purchase, calorie for calorie. And they're very convenient. You can package your soup up, you can refrigerate it, you can freeze it, you can take it with you to work. So it's a great thing to add to your diet. And when we do eat meat, we're going to focus on higher quality meats that are organically raised, that are responsibly raised, where there's no hormones or antibiotics. And because we're eating so much less, these animal proteins, which tend to be more expensive, can still be, it still is affordable. You'll spend around the same amount on animal protein, but we'll eat much less of it. And that's really our goal. And again, we're going to talk about animal protein. Most people, when I say that, most people think about red meat and pork and occasionally chicken, but fish tends to get a free pass. Dairy products like milk and cheese often are not considered animal protein or meat. And we're going to kind of stop here to recognize that any protein substance that comes from an animal, whether it's meat or pork, it's poultry, it's fish, it's cheese or dairy, they're all animal protein, and they're all much more alike than they are different. So when we talk about animal protein here, we're really encompassing all of it, even eggs. And so finally, that gets us to the last stage. And at this stage, we're going to focus on eliminating, or not eliminating, but really minimizing down to around a tablespoon or so a day of refined oil, and also other high-fat animal products, specifically cheese. That's the one thing that comes to mind when we're talking about processed animal products. And instead, we're going to try vegan cheese. We're also going to explore things like nut-based salad dressings, and other things and other cooking techniques that allow us to cook with much less refined oil. Refined oil is not healthy. Even olive oil is not healthy, and that's something that's important to understand. And by focusing on cooking techniques and recipes, and even exploring vegan cheese, we can identify some ways that you can start to eat to really get the cheese out of your diet, and to be able to enjoy your salad with some dressing on it, but not soaked in it, and with a salad dressing that's not going to have a lot of refined oil. So there's a lot. This is really, to me, kind of finishing school, where we just make the final tweaks to our diet to really get it up over that hump. And when we get over this is when the weight really starts to come off. And when at that point you've fully incorporated the Pound a Cure plan. So we can do this at our own pace. In every stage, it's so critical that you try some of these new recipes and you have patience with yourself about them, because the first time you make something, I guarantee you, the first time you try to make vegan cheese, it's not going to turn out all that well. That's the most likely outcome. If it does, congratulations, you're very lucky. But for most people, it kind of comes out not quite right. And with some more research and patience and trial and error, you can come up with something that's actually pretty delicious and helps you satisfy your your cravings. So those recipes are really important. So some final thoughts. This slow, gradual approach works really well for many people. Feel free to move at your own pace and focus on the foods that you're adding in as much, if not more, than the foods that you're eliminating. And also, in terms of patients, you really have to understand that the first month or two, you're probably not going to see a ton of weight loss. It's only when this thing gets rolling and you start getting into the later months that you'll see the weight really coming off. So coming up next, we're going to go and do a deep dive on how to eat a pound of vegetables every day and why it's so important to do so.